We're just about to go live. Welcome everyone to the public hearing for the Northwest Territories Electoral Boundaries Commission 2021-2022. My name is Danielle Mauger. I am the Secretary to the Electoral Boundaries Commission, and I will be the moderator in this evening. With me virtually is Mr. Ted Richard, Chair of the Electoral Boundaries Commission, and Commission members Mr. Glenn Abernethy and Mr. Jack Rowe. The Northwest Territories Legislative Assembly is required to establish an independent Electoral Boundaries Commission after every second general election in the Northwest Territories. The responsibility of the Commission is to review the number, size, and boundaries of the existing electoral districts or ridings, and then to report to the Legislative Assembly with the Commission's recommendations regarding any proposed changes that ought to be made to the area, boundaries, name, and representation of the electoral districts. The Northwest Territories Electoral Boundaries Commission released their interim report late last year, and in the report, 2 options were given for public discussion. This public hearing today is for the Commission to hear from you on your thoughts on the options presented in the interim report, or to hear any other options that maybe the Commission didn't think of. And it's also to open up discussion on what recommendations should be made to the Legislative Assembly during the May-June sitting. I will now give the Chair of the Commission, Mr. Ted Richard, an opportunity to address the public, and then we will go through the list of presenters. Mr. Richard?
Thank you, Danielle. Yes, very briefly, on behalf of myself and my 2 colleagues who are here, we're looking forward to hearing any input that or submissions that the public wish to make about our interim report, which we released in early December. And while I think of it, I just want to reiterate again, because there seems to be some misunderstanding about the status of our interim report. It's very much a discussion paper only. It does not contain, this is the important part, it does not contain any recommendations of our commission. It describes some of the issues that our commission will have to address in our final report. And so we are seeking input from the public at these hearings and written submissions as well on these issues to assist us, the commission, when we are deciding what recommendations to make in our final report. The interim report deals with some larger issues, such as the size of the Legislative Assembly, how many MLAs are necessary. Presently, with 19 members, we have a fairly, in the Canadian context, and it was a fairly high ratio of MLAs to residents or citizens. The ratio now is roughly, in the NWT, is roughly 1 MLA for every 2,500 residents. In the 6 or 7 of the smaller provinces in southern Canada, the ratio varies between 1 MLA per 6,000 people up to 20,000, 25,000 people. And that's in the smaller provinces. I'm not talking Ontario, BC, etc. So we want to deal with that issue in our final report. And in our interim report, we also explain that there are some constitutional constraints on how whatever the number of ridings it is, how those ridings are to be distributed throughout the Northwest Territories. And it deals with concepts such as the relative parity of voting power that should happen with respect to citizens throughout the territories. And our interim report deals also with some exceptions to that principle of relative parity, exceptions that are permissible. In the interim report, we reviewed the current distribution of 19 seats and whether any changes ought to be made. And we did put on the table in our interim report, for discussion purposes, 2 particular options. What we call option A is basically the status quo of 19 MLAs, but we're putting on the table some possible minor changes in a couple of the ridings. And the other option that we put on the table is option B, which would see a slight reduction of seats from 19 down to 16. And specifically, that would mean 3 fewer seats, 1 fewer seat in Yellowknife, and 1 fewer seat in each of Inuvik and Hay River. So those two options were put out there for discussion purposes. There may be other options that our commission should be considering, and this is why we want input. We need input from the public, and that's the reason why we released, let me call it a discussion paper in December rather than calling it an interim report. And I'll just mention another reminder before we go back to our moderator that in addition to these public hearings we've had this week, there's also the opportunity for members of the public to send in a written submission to us on these topics. And that can be done by accessing our website, and there's directions there about how to get the written submission to us. And we've extended the deadline for written submissions until the end of this month, the end of February. So with that, Danielle, I'll turn it back to you as moderator this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. So this evening we have one presenter, Mr. Bill Braden of Yellowknife. So welcome, Mr. Braden. I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Danielle, and it's a pleasure to be joining you on this a pretty important topic, and I'm pleased to see the people that have come together to look at it this time. Something that comes up every 4 years.
8 years.
It's a good review. I want to compliment you, Mr. Chairman, and your staff on putting together a very thorough discussion paper. I thought it framed up very well. I learned quite a bit from reading it about the history of the way the Assembly has evolved. I did submit a written paper, not a lengthy one. I don't know that it's necessary that I read it into your record, but I thought I would just summarize a couple of the highlight points from my point of view, and I'd be wide open to any discussion that you or your panel members may have, Mr. Chair. I'm coming from a background of serving 2 terms in the Legislative Assembly from 1999 to 2007. And I'm pleased to say I was succeeded in that by your colleague, Mr. Abernethy. So I worked through this panel or this review at one time, and where I appreciated the point, a couple of the points that you raised us in terms of discussion. I was always struck by the imbalance between what I, as an urban MLA, if you will, and my colleagues who represented the remote, the distant ridings, and some of them that had 5. I think there was a date show that had six different communities within their riding, and this always seemed to be a considerable imbalance, if you will, from one MLA to the other. So I wanted to come out in support of a suggestion that there be some minor adjustment to balance some of that community load, not a constituent load, but the community load among, I think was it the Dead Show and Handy and Hay River South ridings. I think that's a good move. At least, from that point of view of to try to balance out, at least to some extent, the workload that those MLAs have. I'd also like to offer that, when it comes to you, and you pointed out, Mr. Chair, the considerable imbalance that our legislature has in terms of the number of constituents in ratio to an MLA. Where it's just another example of where the NUT, all three of Canada's northern ridings are just, we're so far off the dial when we try to do comparisons and ratios with the rest of Canada. So, okay, let's figure out what works for us. I don't put a lot of weight into balance ourselves in that respect with the rest of Canada. So in my written submission to you, I said that I don't think it's an overwhelming burden for any of the MLAs in terms of handling their constituency workload. I don't think there's any need to increase the overall number of MLAs in that respect. So let's carry on and continue to tolerate that imbalance in our ratios. I think we're entirely justified to work with it and to carry on. And where there might be a suggestion or an insinuation from between the urban and the rural MLAs that one is to use the word luckier or more fortunate or less burdened than other simply because of the constituents they have. I never saw that come up in my term in an assembly. I don't think the disproportionate ratio interferes really with our work, our relationships, at least in my term. I would finish up, Mr. Chair, reflecting on a suggestion that we could do with fewer MLAs, and in an era where some parts of the world are saying, okay, less government is a better thing. That it's an interesting argument, but I would focus in, Mr. Chair, on the just the sheer workload that a cabinet has in the system that we have. I counted up, I think, 25 different folios, or terms or responsibilities that are spun as 7 members in cabinet. It's an extraordinary workload, and I know that stripping the size of it down to 6 from 7 would help that situation at all. I think it would really dramatically erode our ability in the Legislative Assembly to do the work that's expected, that's required, both on the cabinet side and on the regular member side, Mr. Chair. We could not sustain taking 3 or any more members out of the Assembly without, I think, really threatening its capacity to do the work that's required and expected of it. So I would very strongly would decline the suggestion that we could reduce the size of the Assembly. And respectfully, I think I've said enough. I've summarized what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Braden. Do any of the Commission members have anything to add?
Other than thank you, Bill.
Glenn?
Just thank you, Bill.
Yes, Ted Richard here. Yeah, Bill, I don't have any questions or any elaboration for you. We thank you for your written submission earlier, but by expanding on it somewhat tonight, it's good to hear from you, especially since you know the inside of that legislature and things like the work. So thank you very much for your help, our work.
Thank you, Commission members. So thank you, Mr. Braden, and thank you to the public who is viewing on our social media sites and the Legislative Assembly website for coming out tonight and viewing the final public hearing for the Electoral Boundaries Commission. The Commission, an extension for written submissions was made, so the Commission is accepting written submissions until Monday, February the 28th at 5:00 p.m. If anybody from the public wanted to submit a written submission, they can do so by visiting the Electoral Boundaries website at nwtelectoralboundaries.ca by clicking the Submissions tab. You can also email me at info@nwtelectoralboundaries.ca. Please be sure to watch for the Electoral Boundaries Commission's final report, which will include recommendations to the Legislative Assembly. If anybody has any questions or any further submissions that they would like to inquire about, please contact me again at email info@nwtelectoralboundaries.ca, or you can call me at 867-445-6005. Thank you again to everyone who tuned in tonight, and have a nice evening.
Thank you, Danielle. Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.